to Seeds of Hope, Regenerating Soil and Communities. I'm your host, Ag-tivist, and this is episode number 1. On this podcast, join me on a journey across the regenerative agriculture ecosystem through conversations with farmers, founders, investors, and change makers as we learn what goes into creating healthier soils, communities, and food. To kick off Seeds of Hope, I'm so excited to have Michael Richard II joining us today from New Orleans. Welcome, Michael.
Thank you for having me. So happy to be here.
Yeah, I'm so happy to have you here. So you're in New Orleans. I used to study there, and we were just talking about the wonderfully hot summers.
Yeah, it is blazing down here. It's been a lot hotter than usual the past couple of years.
Right. And I'm curious how that affects farming. I know here in Florida, my garden is pretty on pause right now. Just have some sweet potatoes
Yeah,
doing their thing in the soil.
it's definitely sweet potato season. Everything else is kind of you grow. You can't really do right now, tomatoes and that type of thing. And the way that it's really messing with growing down here is we're kind of getting that our long, beautiful growing season is getting shortened, unfortunately. And usually
Oh,
that warm weather allows us to grow a lot longer than the rest of the country, but now it's getting too warm too quick, and so it's shortening the time span that we have to grow things without having to deal with massive amounts of pest pressure or droughts or anything like that. Last year we had a drought. That was a first for me. I don't know, maybe if y'all heard about the saltwater wedge that was coming to New Orleans. We almost had an issue where we didn't
hmm.
have clean water to drink because the drought was causing the salt water to intrude into the city. And if it would have got into the city lines, it would have ruined everything. But fortunately, that didn't happen. But, it was a scary ordeal. So we're definitely starting to try to adapt to growing in this more extreme weather.
Yeah. I think extreme heat is a huge topic here in Miami too. And also salt water in infusing our aquifer. So it's a big problem. But before we dive more into that, there's two things we still got to do. First, introduce who you are to our listeners, and also something that might be controversial that I came out with as someone who's in Miami and has lived in New Orleans. I saw that you're a Miami Dolphins fan.
I have my Dolphins cup right here.
Oh,
Yes, I'm a huge Dolphins fan, lifelong Dolphins fan. My family are divided between the Dolphins and the Saints. Well, really, it's just my dad and I who are the Dolphins fans. So very divided household.
yeah, as sports can do it. I mean, in the middle of Saints country.
Mhm. Yep, yep. Not many Dolphins fans around here. People always give me strange looks when I have my jersey on.
Well, someone's got to represent the Dolphins. I mean, here in Miami, obviously, we have a huge following, but that was an interesting fact I saw. So, without further ado, give a little introduction. Michael is the farm director at Recirculating Farms in New Orleans and has longtime experience in training, hands-on learning, and farm management, particularly in aquaponic and regenerative urban growing farm practices, which I'm super curious to talk about more later today. And he also was featured on an episode in Queer Eye, season 7, I believe, right? Cool. So that's Michael. He's here with us today. And Michael, I'd love for you to share a little bit with us and the listeners about your background and how you got to where you're now.
Yeah, for sure. Like you said, I'm Michael Richard. I'm from New Orleans. I'm a native New Orleanian. I have a background, I have a bachelor's in sociology. I just recently got my master's in environmental law and policy from Loyola. I'm going to be pursuing a law degree, a Juris Doctorate very soon. So that
Mm.
is kind of my initial goals was to always do something in the policy world, the rulemaking world. And unfortunately, the schooling that was available to me at the time wasn't really satisfying my needs, so I switched over to sociology. And thankfully, through that transition, I met a professor who was very heavily involved in urban agriculture, and it really opened my eyes to what urban agriculture is and can be. I had grandparents who had plots, and even my grandpa grew up on a farm. My grandmother had a big, very large garden. My parents' garden growing up, we had exotic birds and things like that. So we grew fruits and vegetables to try to, help cover the cost of feeding them and things like that. So I was always around growing in agriculture, but I had never seen agriculture that was up to scale that could feed more than just one household in an urban environment. So when I was introduced to that, I was immediately intrigued, and then he also introduced me to aquaponics and hydroponics, and that's when I really started to dive in because New Orleans is a food desert, as many
Mm,
people know. I try to stay away from that term food desert. I prefer the term food apartheid because it gives more intentionality behind it. Desert implies that it's something naturally occurring, but apartheid is a political instrument that was created through intention, and that is how a lot of these places were created, especially here in New Orleans, a place that's known for its food, especially its seafood. Yet most of the
hmm
people who live here don't actually have access to that food. So there's a very different experience for the people who come to visit New Orleans and the people who live here. Their relationship with food is extremely different, and I don't think that's right because the culture of New Orleans is what makes us great, and that culture starts from the ground level up. It's not held only within restaurants or fancy tourist traps or wherever it may be. It's something that is widespread throughout the community, and I see that people are getting more and more disconnected with that because the prices of food is going up and up and up, and also the way that we grow food also disconnects people from the food because a lot more people used to
mm,
fish and used to grow their own things. So they had that connection. And that has really faded. And I really wanted to strengthen that. And I think that in a place like New Orleans, there is a really great opportunity to sort of show the rest of the country and the rest of the world what's possible because people see us as a very big city and we have very big city problems, but we're small enough where you can really get a lot of momentum going and you can really collectivize with other leaders, and it's not as hard in a large place like New York or something where there's thousands of people and there's this large expanse that you have to cross to meet with each other. So I just really dove head in. I saw urban agriculture as a way for me to be able to touch all the things that I wanted to within the policy world, economic world, and also it touches everything. It's a way to connect everyone. I saw it as a way to break down barriers and heal communities, and also to heal myself. I'm part Native American, part Black, and so learning about agriculture started to connect me to these indigenous traditions which really spoke to me. I took a lot of indigenous studies classes when I was in school, so I was learning about these things while I was also learning about urban agriculture. So all of this really synergized for me, and it really motivated me to get into this space and to really. Like I said, to really bridge those connections, to connect people back to their cultures, and not just in the indigenous world, in other cultures as well. That's why I really gravitated towards food. And also, I'm a New Orleanian. I love to cook. And
mm.
being out there in nature, there's really nothing better than that. I grew up in a sort of different area of New Orleans. I grew up in New Orleans East. It's a lot more rural out there. It's kind of swampy. I grew up right by a nature reserve. So I was used to being around nature. I wasn't as used to being around all concrete. So being able to create those spaces was really important to me because I got to see the impact it had on my cousins and god brothers and god sisters when they were able to come out to our house out there and really be out in nature and play and not necessarily all around concrete. And it was just a completely different environment. And I was able to see how that affected them. And all of those things just really came together to motivate me to just dive head in first and to go into urban agriculture and food justice advocacy.
Wow, thank you for sharing that whole story. I think you touched on so many different pieces that go into what our communities are like, what kind of food we get, health, connection to nature, to roots and indigenous and ancient growing practices, as well as, access to the food of the culture that's current. So, and how connected our communities are with what's happening in policy and on a national and international level. So, really interesting. And so, your path is going to your JD and going into law and policy. So, I'm really curious what's led you to that from going from grassroots, where you're really working with people on the ground, to moving into that other very connected sphere.
The way that I look at it is I'm going to get my JD to have as another tool in my belt. I think I will always work primarily on the grassroots level. One of my primary goals with all of my actions, I found this term when I went to a convention a few years ago called an Ag-tivist. And that's really what
Mm,
I'm an agricultural activist, and I use agriculture as a tool of activism. And I really want to use agriculture, as I kind of described already, in a way of doing as a tool to fix a very wide range of problems. But one of those, like in the policy world, is to use agriculture as a place to bring people together. I don't really like to use the word empower, but to show people the abilities that they have, to show people ways that they can take charge and take control of processes around them. Um, and by going to law school, I believe that I'm going to gain the tools to sort of demystify something else. I Every day I demystify agriculture for people. They think it's so complicated, it's so hard. And being in law school, I'm learning that a lot of these systems that we have are complicated simply to hold power within certain groups. We use languages and processes that are unnecessarily complicated just to create a barrier from the common person. And I'm trying to break down those barriers so people can become more politically active, more civically engaged, and really just take more control over their life, whether they don't want to get involved in politics or they do. I want them to be able
mm.
to make that choice and have that freedom and not feel like they're forced into a decision.
I love that. My background is in finance, and I feel very similarly about the financial industry, where it's made to be this really scary, unapproachable thing, um, through using words and terms that are unnecessarily excluding. But I love the term food apartheid in kind of contrast to food desert. And you also talked a lot about the power of urban farming. And community-based farming. So I'd love to hear a little more about what community-based farming is, and how do you see, in your experience, has urban farming affected communities that experience food apartheid in New Orleans?
Whenever we have groups and people coming, we always try to encourage people to use food apartheid instead of food desert because it really hones in, like I said, on that intentionality. And I think it also draws a nice comparison. Well, nice, but it draws a very good comparison of to the apartheid of Africa and seeing the segregation, especially because a lot of this political violence happens in black and brown areas. So I think that it also kind of drives home the connection towards the racial intention behind it all. But I have seen that urban agriculture is a really great way of bringing communities together and really helping try to undo a lot of the racial harm that was done in a lot of these communities. So, for instance, we're in Central City, New Orleans. Central City is a historic neighborhood in New Orleans, which is already a historic city itself. There were lots of civil rights movements that were brought up in right there in Central City. We had lots of large civil rights leaders there. Martin Luther King was there. There's plaques all over Central City commemorating a lot of the movements that were going on there. And there's more to come because people want to shine a brighter light on it. So we're in that neighborhood because other people are in other areas of New Orleans already doing this work. And we felt like Central City was getting a little bit ignored. So we wanted to focus our energy there. But we focused our energy there because we were seeing what was able to be done in other places when you really focus and you become a part of the community. We saw how other organizations had community members feeling ownership of the place and taking care of it and feeling like it was a resource for them, feeling like it's not just a place for them to come, volunteer and do work and pull weeds, but it's also a place for them to just chill and recharge their batteries, or maybe they need to literally charge their batteries and plug in their phone, or they need a drink of water or something like that. We see the power in that, and we wanted to be that for this neighborhood. And that is really the spirit of New Orleans. That is what I grew up around in New Orleans, and that I feel like this is something that you hear a lot across the country where people used to know their neighbors and people are a lot more neighborly and communal. And I really want to bring that back. I really want to try to foster that more. So does my entire team, and that's why we're here doing the work that we do, and that's why we also partner with other people in our community because we
Hmm.
can't do it on your own. You can't do it in a silo. It is really all about collective power, and that's really what we're trying to foster. So we're always engaging with the community so they can tell us what classes they want, what crops they would like us to grow, what events they would like us to have, because even though I'm from here, I don't have all the answers. I don't know what every person wants. And contrary to what a lot of the nation would probably think, or a lot of the world would probably think, New Orleans is extremely diverse. It's not just black and white. And the black and white people, black and white with air quotes, people that are there, they might just be black and white presenting. They could be from
Mm.
all types of different people. For instance, we have an Afro Latino family that lives right next door, and right next door to the farm. And I had never had an experience with that community. I personally didn't even know there was such a large Afro Latino community around. But once I started interacting with them and spending more time with them, I saw that there was a whole community that I didn't even realize was here, and I lived here. So just bridging those gaps, once again, making those connections, bridging gaps. That's really what community gardening and community focused agriculture is all about for us. And we see that bringing those bonds together, strengthening the community, is the way that you can really undo a lot of those racial harms and also create a positive path forward, an equitable path forward, where like most all great movements don't have a singular leader; they're spread out.
Mm.
It's decentralized, and that is what you really want, and that is the type of environment that we're trying to foster.
Yeah, absolutely. And I imagine if the people who are getting engaged, the people who are taking ownership from diverse backgrounds and contributing to what you're teaching and starting maybe their own gardens in their communities, that could have a huge ripple effect. So, what are some of the courses that you teach at the farm? And the recirculating farm, that name is also really interesting. So, what does that mean?
Yeah, so recirculating farm, we actually, it's so funny. We actually just had a team meeting today and we are talking about this a little bit. So recirculating farm means a lot. Uh, Recirculating is something that we sort of, it's what we do. We recirculate resources so that whether that's grants, free seeds, free tools, just a contact, we're constantly sharing and trying to circulate that through the ecosystem, through whether that's financial, the actual environment, through the community ecosystem. We're always trying to circulate those resources through. When it comes to agriculture, we are constantly recirculating energy through the system. That is what we're always doing. And so, like, upcycling is something that people are becoming more familiar with. So, it's essentially taking energy that would be air quotes wasted and then putting it into a product that can produce more energy, and that's what we're constantly doing. We have a composting program. We do regenerative agriculture. Regenerative agriculture is where, in the simple form, is where you're giving more to the land than what you're taking from it, and you have a system that is constantly solving its own problems, using nature to solve its own problems and keeps itself sustainable. And it's not
Mm.
sustainable in a way of where it's like we're maximizing what we can do and keeping it going, but it's not just sustaining; it's thriving and it's continuing to grow itself. We also recirculating comes from our original mission. So we were originally created out of Food and Water Watch, which is the watchdog organization. Our executive director, Marianne Cufone, is a full-time lawyer, and she runs the environmental law department at Loyola. And
Mm.
she fights a lot of cases against fisheries, offshore fisheries, and things like that. And so we wanted to show that there is a solution to the problem that she's currently fighting, which are offshore fish farms. Offshore fish farms are being created because there's a high demand for fish, but and we know this, and we know that demand isn't going where. So instead of just fighting against it, we also try to provide a solution, which is onshore land-based aquaculture. We didn't create this solution; it's just one that we are trying to share. Aquaculture, land-based aquaculture, is not anything new. It is a very primitive practice. Aquaponics, which is something that we're known for, is a primitive practice, and I like to tell people this. And unfortunately, it's being branded these days as innovative agriculture. I don't really like that term innovative because I feel like it's
Mm.
kind of discrediting the people who made it in the first place. We're just adding plastics and electric pumps and things like that to it. But the concept and a lot of the techniques even are very old. So we practice recirculating. We have recirculating aquaponics systems. So that is like sort of where the name started, because the water in this system goes out of a fish tank into our grow bed. The water is then cleaned through the grow bed by the rocks and the plants that are in there, and then clean water goes back into the bed, and the all of the fish waste is turned into fertilizer for the plants. So it's a recirculating system. So that's kind of where it all started, but we've really taken that name and run with it and really incorporate that into our everyday mission.
Yeah. Aquaponics is so fascinating to me, and especially after learning how destructive wild fishing practices are. Um, the fact that we can have a system in which both fish can thrive and then their waste can circle into plants, feed the plants, they clean the water and bring it down. Nature's brilliant.
Yeah, it really nature has all the answers, and it's a really efficient system as well. It's very customizable. So we really love sharing that with people because it's a way that we feel like it can make self-sustainable agriculture more accessible to a lot of people.
Can you give another example? You mentioned earlier an example of recirculating is recirculating the energy in your farm. What is an example of that?
Yeah, so we have a composting program. That's one of the more forefront ones that we have. So people from the neighborhood can bring their compost to us 3 days a week, and we take that and we turn that back into soils, which we then use around our farm, and sometimes we give away to community members as well. It keeps food out of the landfill. It saves us a lot of money because we don't have to buy compost. Also gives us a
Mm.
lot of control over our compost. But yeah, we really enjoy doing that because otherwise, that food would be going to a landfill and creating CO2 and other greenhouse gases. But when we compost properly, those gases are then trapped, and all of those nutrients are also being able to be used to grow plants to feed people instead of just wasting away in a landfill somewhere.
Yeah, I started my own compost here and kind of as a way because our building doesn't recycle and we were having so much trash. And now every time someone wants to throw away any organic food scraps, to me it's like gold.
Yeah,
And I was like, don't
it is.
throw away.
It is.
Yeah, so it can be quite addicting to see something that you would otherwise throw away turn into this black gold, this
Yeah.
moist earth with so much life in it.
It's really amazing. And so people laugh at me all the time. They come to the farm, I give them tours and stuff, and I'm like, smell the compost. And they're like, what? I'm like, finished compost smells amazing, though. Like, I need to go make a compost candle right now.
A compost candle.
Like, some farmers would love that. The smell of fresh soil is so amazing. I love it.
Oh my God, you heard it here. This is trademarked by
Yep.
Michael. Very cool. I wanted to also circle back to something else you said earlier, in the spirit of community and systems that you do have partners in New Orleans that you work with because this type of work can't be done alone. What are some of the partners that you have in New Orleans?
Yeah, so we have really great partnerships with a lot of people. A few years ago, we started a group called the GLC, the Growing Local Collaborative, and it was with some people that we worked with a lot, and we figured we should finally formalize this partnership that we have. So, and the goal of that group of all of us in that group, is to create an equitable local food system, and
Mm.
we all represent different parts of that food system in our eyes, and so collaborating was the most efficient way to get the work done. So we have FPAC, which is the Food Policy Action Committee, formerly the Food Policy Advisory Committee. They're the official food policy advisory arm of the city. They don't work for the city. They're just an organ. They are officially signed on to be the advisory council for the city for food policy. We have Sprout NOLA, which is another nonprofit agricultural organization. They have a couple of different green spaces, but one of their main goals is to grow growers. And so they're giving technical assistance to people, helping them fill out loan applications, figuring out crop plans, how to plant a profitable farm, that kind of stuff. Then you have Top Box Foods. So Top Box Foods is a delivery system. So they're sort of like a Hello Fresh meets Walmart delivery. So they're the delivery mechanism, and then we're in there and we kind of do a little bit of everything. We do policy, we do farmer training, we do logistical stuff in like aggregation and food distribution, sort of like Top Box. Not exactly like Top Box. We don't have a big distribution thing, but we do distribute food on the regular basis. So we also that we represent all these different parts, and we started just doing the work with each other a lot more intentionally, and even starting to go in on grants with each other, and that has really grown and really uh I feel like it's really started a culture shift in the city. I'm not saying that we take full credit for that, but I know when I started in the nonprofit sector, I did not see a whole lot of collaboration, and there's a lot of people duplicating services, doing the exact same thing, fighting for the exact same money instead of just working together. And when we work together, we get a lot done. And I feel like that we can claim that we've been a great example for other people in this space. And now that collective has grown. So we have more people in the collective now. We have the CCFM, Crescent City's Farmers Market, which is the organization that runs all the farmers market for the city. And a few other people as well. Some people that aren't even in New Orleans, but are in working for food security in the state. So we're really happy about that community collaboration. And we also work with people who aren't in the food space. We work with the VA. So I teach veteran specific classes once a week. We started a garden at the veterans facility here. There's a community here, a neighborhood that's essentially all veterans. We're starting a program with them right now. We just started it a few months ago, teaching them how to grow on their own. We're developing a farm on their site. We work with elderly people as homes that have mostly people with disabilities or mobility issues. We work with people, communities who like old folks homes, I guess you could call it. Like we'll go there, we'll do classes with them that aren't just about growing. Sometimes it's chair yoga or making teas or, health supportive cooking classes, like cooking with high blood pressure or diabetes, things like that. We also do classes and with other uh like cultural arts centers and things like that. Um and we also work with schools. We work with other organizations that are just community focused and maybe they want a green space. We'll help them develop that, give them seeds, give them a little bit of training. So we really try to work within the community. Wherever people want us, we'll try to be there and show up. Even if it's just showing up to table and spread some information, or maybe you needed a little, wanted to tap into our volunteer network, whatever it may be, we just try to
Mm.
help out wherever we can.
Mm. So that's really super interconnected web of organizations. And I love that there's synergy emerging where before it was more siloed,
Yeah.
much like when you plant a lot of different crops and they help each other rather
Yes,
than
exactly.
competing. So, what do you see? So many people working on the equitable food system. What do you see as some of the biggest roadblocks or challenges towards moving into an equitable food system on a bigger scale?
If the very simple answer is money. I think that we're fighting an uphill battle against some giants. The large corporations of the world, the Cargills, Monsantos, Cisco's, Sodexo's, all these large companies that have a stranglehold essentially on the food system, not just in America, but literally across the world, literally across the globe. These
Mm,
companies control basically everything. And so it's David versus Goliath right now. And so we that is our biggest battle for sure. And I think to kind of step back from that, I feel like that's a very obvious answer. Most of the problems in the world are because we're fighting against these giant corporations with too much power. But to sort of step back from it, the other big barrier to creating a more equitable food system, um, it does tie into corporations, is people's access to healthy, affordable food, and people's knowledge about what properly grown, and I use the term properly loosely because I should say ethically grown food. Ethically grown food does not look like what's in at Walmart right now. Grown food may not even be what's at Whole Foods right now. There's organic is a very loose term. Organic means different things to different people. What some people are saying or is organic, what are you buying at the store right now that's labeled as organic would never be grown on my farm the way that it was grown there. And to each its own. Can make their own decisions. But I think that because people are so used to the perfect tomato or the perfect apple, you have a lot of hesitancy to pay more for something that doesn't look as nice. But there's so many benefits to that more expensive product, and that's why it does cost more. And we also have unfortunately, a lot of people aren't aware of the true cost of food. There are a lot of injustices that happen for us to have such cheap food, and to have this fragmented food system that we have, where people are essentially destroying the earth to reap the benefits right now, but they'll have many issues later. So that's a big issue, and also even education on the commercial side is something that we run into, and the government has acknowledged this and they claim that things are getting a little bit better, but there's people who are traditional farmers, traditional industrial farmers who've been doing this for generations, and they don't want to change their ways. They don't see how to change their ways. Even changing your ways is expensive. That's
Mhm.
so there's people who've been farming like this for generations, and a lot of people don't realize that farms aren't that profitable. Even these very large farms, and it's due to a lot of these large corporations, and a long conversation that we probably don't have time for today. But a lot of things cause farms to be operating on very thin margins, so they don't really have the space to change. um and they're also afraid of the change because they don't it's a whole new thing to learn. It's a whole new way of growing to learn, and there's also a technological barrier to having regenerative agriculture go to scale. Right now we don't really have the tools to use regenerative practices on a large scale without manual labor, which would dramatically increase the price of food. So until we have automated technology that can do things like interplanting, um, then we won't really have regenerative agriculture on a large scale. It'll still be more of this monocropping thing. But there is some hope on the horizon on the technological side. I've seen videos and presentations from people who have modified military equipment and old tractors and added AI and new sensors and all these things. And it's looking like we will have a technical answer to these things soon. So then it'll just be convincing these people that this is the way to grow, and it really is. It's cheaper, it's better for their land, it's the right way to go. But you have to convince people. And a lot of these people are old. Like honestly, it's always harder to convince older people. The average age of farmers in America is 65. I personally think that's a national security issue, and we should really focus a lot of energy on that. Because if there's no farmers to farm food, what are we gonna do? So I think those are the biggest barriers to creating an equitable food system, just right off of the rip.
Hmm. Can you quickly explain what intercropping is?
Yeah, so intercropping is where you grow more than one crop at a time. So the way that we traditionally, or the way that industrial farming traditionally does things, is by planting all of one thing. So you'll see a field of all corn. But if you come to my farm, you're gonna see peppers planted right next to some basil, planted right with some onions going down the middle of the row, and that's because these plants can benefit each other, and there's lots of synergies between the plants, but there's also just benefits of not having a lot of one thing in an area, because when you monocrop, your plants become a lot more susceptible to pests and to disease because they're all the same. So if one disease can kill one thing, it can kill everything. And if there's a pest that really loves your corn, well, they're gonna have a field day, literally. So
Oh, yeah.
so that's what we do. We do intercropping.
Awesome. Thanks for that. So we are coming up on time. Actually, we're a little bit over because we've had such a great conversation. So the last thing I'd love to know is how can people get involved if people feel inspired after learning about how communities and food and how to create the food and policy are so intertwined. Um, How can people get involved?
Yeah, so there's probably a community garden somewhere that you are. There are community gardens all over the place, and I think there's a lot of momentum around community gardening and agriculture right now. So I feel like if there isn't one, I'm sure we could start one, and I'm positive you'd have some people coming to help you really soon. But check on Facebook. Find groups of other gardeners in your area. See if there is a community gardening if there's a community garden around you, see if there's an agricultural group. Down here, we have a group called GNOGA. It stands for Greater New Orleans Grows Alliance. We're a chapter of the National Young Farmers Coalition. So the National Young Farmers has chapters all over the country. You can go to their website and see if maybe there's one by you. If there isn't one, you can start one. It's not very hard. It's very helpful. I felt very isolated when I got into agriculture. I didn't know anyone else doing it, but I found this community at Ganoga, and it really changed a lot for me. It was people I could learn from. It was a very great opportunity. Love that community. People I work with every day now. Find that community and get into it. And then, if you want to do something on your own, you want to do a little bit something at your house, the internet is your best friend. We have videos on our YouTube at Recirculating Farms. We're Recirculating Farms on all of our social media. We have tons of guides up. There's tons of great people on YouTube who have great guides. I love James Prigioni. He's one of my favorite people on YouTube. He has great stuff, and he follows similar ideology as I do around growing using permaculture techniques. He has like a food forest. It's really cool. So just do that. And if you're not on the agriculture side, maybe you just want to support a equitable food system. Go to your local farmers market. Support your local farmer. Get to know your local farmer. Support restaurants that support local agriculture. Those are ways that you can make an impact. And the absolute biggest that I tell everyone, go vote, be civically engaged, because a lot of this change needs to happen at the ground level and work its way up. If we're trying to do top-down approaches, it's going to take very long, and it's going to be very fickle, because as we know, all it takes is for one administration to come in and undo change. But when you have real grassroots change, it's very hard to undo that. Try to put good leaders in place. And if you are that good leader, please be brave, be bold, and be the change you want to see. I know it sounds corny, but please do, because we need more brave leaders in this world.
Yes, I love that. Grassroots work is hard to undo. Um, well, thank you so much, Michael, for joining us for the first episode of Seeds of Hope.
That should be your first episode.
Yes, I really enjoyed our conversation. Thank you for all the amazing work you do in New Orleans and beyond.
Thank you so much. Have you back anytime.
Sounds good. Have a good day.
Thank you. You too.
Thank you for listening to Seeds of Hope. If you enjoyed the show, please follow us on Spotify, Apple Podcast, or your favorite platform so you never miss an episode. Share it with a friend who might find it inspiring. And if you're loving the podcast, we'd be grateful if you could leave a rating and review on Spotify or Apple Podcasts. It really helps others discover us. See you next time, and thanks again.